Today, I'm gonna go through everything that you need to know to shoot professional quality video on your iPhone. And I don't mean like YouTuber cinematic transitions. I mean professional work that we create for our clients. We do a lot of commercial and social media campaigns, and we've been shooting more and more of it using iPhones because they have a lot of professional features. So I'm using an iPhone 15 Pro today. You don't need that to follow along. I'll leave some of the exclusive features to these newer Pro phones towards the end, but we will cover all of the settings, apps, and tricks to squeeze every bit of quality out of your iPhone. And before we start shooting, I want you to open the settings app. We're gonna scroll down until you see camera, and we're gonna change a few of the defaults here. Starting off with record video. These settings are just the defaults when you launch the camera app. You can still change them later, but I'd like to start off by looking at the resolution. So 1080 at 30 frames per second, that's good for most people shooting everyday things, is what I would recommend. But for professional work, I like to turn that up to 4K at 30 frames per second because then you're able to crop in. Even though publishing to Instagram or TikTok is only ever 1080, 4K gives you more options. I would recommend against using 60 frames per second unless you're shooting slow motion. I see a lot of people use this as their default, and unless you're gonna slow it down, there's absolutely no reason. 60 frames per second looks kind of weird, takes up a lot of space. You should be shooting at 30 most of the time. If and when you're in Europe, you're gonna wanna turn on Show PAL formats. That can get rid of some of your image flicker. A huge tip I've had a lot of people thank me for later is turning off HDR video. This is on by default in modern iPhones and gives you that really punchy look where the whites are super white. It's a neat look. It looks kind of hyper realistic, but it's much harder to work with. It's not compatible with all programs and you are gonna struggle with it so much more. Just turn it off. You don't need it right now. And a newer feature is lock white balance. I love to turn that on so as soon as you start recording, the white balance doesn't change on you. This is a more pro feature. So for maybe home video, you could keep this off, but I love having it on. Scrolling back to the composition area, I love to have my grids on, which just show you these crossbars and gives you a much better sense of whether your images are straight or not. And a new feature that is so helpful, definitely turn it on, is level. This just provides a subtle little level. You can see that in the middle as you tilt your phone, and it turns yellow once it's level. This is so helpful for setting up a shot just perfectly. I'm always keeping an eye on it. A lot of these settings are for photography, so we're not talking about that today. Let's go into formats, take a look at spatial video. You can ignore for now, turn that off. Unless you have a Vision Pro, then definitely turn it on, but we're not going into that today. And we're gonna turn on Apple ProRes, and ProRes encoding should be on log. This is more advanced. This isn't on every phone. Again, we'll cover it later, but turn it on right now so you can see it if it's available. In terms of apps, we're gonna spend a lot of time in the default camera app. I think it is what most people should be using most of the time. It is a really great app and it can kind of get the most out of the iPhone camera. But another you should download right now before we start working in it is Blackmagic Camera. This is where you're gonna do all of your more professional settings. You can see right now I have some kind of strange settings on. You kind of don't need this for your everyday use, but you do need to have it in your back pocket because it's the tool set with all the pro stuff in here. I've been using it more and more. We'll come back to it later. Let's start with the default camera app. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this interface. You can swipe left and right to go between different modes. Up here in the top right, you can tap on the resolution if you want to go between HD and 4K, and you can also change the frame rate. So this is when I'd switch to 60 frames per second if I'm doing some slow motion, but I keep it on either 24 for cinematic stuff or 30 frames per second as my default. At the bottom, you've got your zoom modes. One little trick I don't know if everybody knows is that if you touch and hold, you can rock it back and forth and get a smooth zoom in and out. Just a little helpful thing there. And a very important feature that I know isn't intuitive, if you swipe up, this is where you get all of your additional more professional settings. You can also open and close that with this arrow at the top of the screen, however you like to do it. There is some very helpful stuff in here. The most commonly used one for me is exposure compensation. By going down on this, usually I'm going down, not up, it'll just drop the overall exposure of the whole scene and kind of keep it there. Even if things come in front of the scene, it'll adjust for it, but it will still go darker than usual. And I really like that look. So often I'm keeping this down by -0.3 or -0.7, just to darken the image off a little bit. Just if you notice your image is inexplicably dark, remember later that you can go and turn it back off. You can also access in the top left here. The other settings down here will turn on and off your flash. They will switch to ProRes mode, which again, not covering that right now. And this is action mode. Action mode blows my mind. We've had it for a couple years now, and I covered it in the iPhone review. And start recording here, and I'll punch way in. Let's say we want to get a Michael Bay shot of this statue. So as I'm walking, this looks completely shaky. This looks like this is going to be unusable. But trust me, just try to keep it in the center approximately, and action mode will do the rest. and it was so effective. A lot of people said that I was faking the results. In my iPhone Filmmaker's Guide last year, I went a bit more in depth in this because I don't think that you need to use it all the time. It's like if you are running or in a bumpy car, but the normal stabilization by default is amazing and you can get by with that in most situations. So, play with action mode for sure, but you don't need it on by default because it does also crop in and you lose a bit of resolution. Shooting in these higher quality settings will absolutely fill up your phone. So I always need to buy the biggest one and buy tons of iCloud storage. Like I have the maximum amount and I'm still almost filling it up. So if you're like me and you need to clear out some space every once in a while, the best way to do it is with the app Clean My Phone, sponsor of this video. It's an AI-powered cleaning app for the iPhone and iPad. When you run it for the first time, Declutter is going to scan all of your photos looking for anything that it can declutter, looking at all of the file sizes of your videos, your photos, and your apps. What absolutely shocked me was to see that I have 67 gigabytes of screen recordings. Like this is all from, I'm screen recording this video right now. So I make tutorials and it fills up my phone, but I had no idea until I ran this declutter. It's a careful file cleaner, so it suggests duplicate photos that you can remove and just keep the best ones instead of all the junk that you don't really need. But it can do more than just declutter. Clean My Phone can also organize similar photos based on themes and categories like portraits, travel, pets, food, and text. So it's easier to find what you're looking for. And as you're going through organizing things, you can also sort files by file size to make sure that you're keeping the correct resolution or getting rid of the biggest images that you don't want to hold on to. Like this 5 megabyte black file, I don't need that. And the app does all of this on device. It does not need to connect to the internet, so all of your embarrassing selfies and spicy photos are safe. And a great time to do it actually is when you're on a flight. You can just run the scan and you have all the time in the world to just sit there and sort through photos and clean up your phone. And on top of keeping your phone organized, Clean My Phone can also test your network connection to see if anything might be slowing it down. And it's also iPad compatible, so you can keep all of your photo libraries organized. Clean My Phone can save you a ton of time and storage, keeping all the memories you care about without having to spend more money on iCloud every month. So instead of seeing a storage full message, you'll have room to create more memories. So use the link below to get started. It's going to give you a 3-day trial, and then you can find where all of the biggest files on your phone are currently hiding. Thanks again to Clean My Phone for sponsoring this video. There are a few more basic fundamental features of the camera app that everybody needs to know. And I think I need to open the window to show this. This has totally changed my lighting here. So you probably already know by now, wherever you tap will set the focus and the exposure on the screen. If you find it's not adjusting enough, you can tap and drag. That will either over or underexpose to that area. Now, one big limitation of this is wherever I tap, it's setting the focus, the exposure, and the white balance all in that one spot. And there's a lot of reasons you might want to separate those. So that's when you want to use a more professional app like Blackmagic Camera. This isn't the only professionally oriented video camera app for the iPhone, but it is the one that Apple worked most closely with Blackmagic, who is a very professional company making high-end hardware and software, so they know what they're doing in terms of video. Up at the top are our primary settings, which actually drives me kind of crazy that if I want to switch lenses, I need to reach way up there and I can get to my ultra wide. But what's very helpful is I can go to this exposure compensation and I can move it separately from all the other settings. So I can just overexpose. And then meanwhile, over here, I have my focus point, which I could set that on something different from where the exposure is being set. Then when we're doing a professional shoot, I can lock everything down so nothing changes. I can change the white balance from auto to locked, or set it to an arbitrary number in between. I actually want to be a little warmer here. I can customize my shutter speed. And since I don't have an ND filter on here, I can't do full control over it, but I can lock it. So then at least it's not changing exposure as I shoot. Same thing with ISO, I can set it to a manual number. All right, now let's get my studio lighting back under control. And now we'll dial it into something more accurate. I often like to just turn on auto white balance for a moment, turn it back off, and you'll be pretty close, but it'll be locked, so it won't keep changing. If you have control over your lighting or an ND filter, you're gonna wanna shoot your shutter at double your frame rate. If not, I wouldn't worry about it too much for iPhone footage. So I'm at 1/60th of a second. That means I can turn up my ISO a little bit to get exactly the right exposure. And there's something important to know about lenses. I can start recording so I can show you the difference. The ultra wide, the 0.5 lens, is way less sharp than the 24 millimeter. That's like the 1x standard lens you're using most of the time. And if you're using an iPhone Pro, that zoom lens, the 77 millimeter, is also not quite as sharp. So you want to try to default to that 24 when quality is the absolute priority. I use the other two all the time, but just be aware that they will degrade the image a little bit. They're not quite at the same level. Also, the sensors are smaller, so there's a little bit more noise. Now, if you're anything like me, you might wonder, why complicate things? Blackmagic Camera is a third-party app. It's a little more complicated to use, and the image quality is exactly the same whether you shoot in the default camera app or third-party ones. It's using the same camera and sensor. Here's why. Right now, I'm in the default camera app again. Let's switch ProRes to on. As soon as we switch it over, we see this very flat image. This is a log profile, meaning you're gonna need to add some color grading later, but it can look a lot better. If you look at the top here, I'm actually running out of space. I gotta delete some files, using clean my phone, but there's only 5 minutes of storage available on my phone right now. These ProRes log files created by the default camera app are enormous, like massive. They're recording in ProRes 422 HQ, which is a very professional format. It's great, and Apple chose that so that if you're capturing using this setting, you could never lose any image quality. But it's so inefficient, I just can't possibly use it. It'll fill your phone in moments, which is actually what happened to me here. So instead, let's switch over, and now we are back in Blackmagic Camera. We're gonna go into Settings, and up at the top, we have a list of different codecs that we can choose from. By default, HEVC is how the iPhone typically shoots, but you can choose others. Here is ProRes 422 HQ that I mentioned. I'm gonna say ProRes 422 LT. This is much smaller. It's a fraction of the size and retains almost all of the image quality of 422 HQ. So this is the sort of in-between setting where like you can use this in professional contexts, but it's noticeably smaller. Now, for most people, I don't even think you need to go that far. Let's look at HEVC, which is also H.265. And at the same time, we're gonna switch the color space over to Apple Log HDR. Now, if we flip back to the camera, you'll see the image is completely flat, but we can add a LUT using some of the different display settings here. And a LUT is just a set of instructions of how the color should be changed in a standardized way. So this is adding the saturation and contrast back to the image. So while we're shooting, we get an accurate preview. There's also a lot of other helpful display settings here within Blackmagic that I often turn on. Like you can see kind of borders of the frame or different focus peaking settings. Like these are all pro features that are super helpful. But most importantly now, I can shoot in this log format. It looks like normal footage as I shoot it. It's not that big, so I can manage the files later, and it holds on to so much more image quality. Shooting log is how you match this to professional cameras. Like right now I'm shooting on a Lumix in log, and it's color graded. If I flip this around to the selfie camera, which like this is the lowest quality camera on the phone, and I record in a log profile, I can get pretty close to matching this full frame mirrorless camera to a tiny little sensor on an iPhone. Like they look different. You won't get the same image quality, but you can get the same tonal range, and it doesn't do that extra strong HDR that you see in typical phone processing. This is a lot of the reason that I was so excited in my iPhone 15 review. It was a huge upgrade. This isn't available on all phones, just the latest and greatest, but it's amazing. One thing that's missing from Blackmagic Camera is the ultra slow frame rates. So you can go up to 60 frames per second here. That's kind of typical slow motion. But if you want to go to something like 120 or even 240 frames per second, that's only available in the default camera app. Also, keep in mind, the resolution of these is not nearly as good as using some of the other formats. They only shoot in HD, but it's an even softer HD because it's just so processor intensive to shoot in slow motion that cameras often cut corners in that slow motion footage. So if you want no loss in quality, you should be shooting in 60 frames per second, but it's not nearly as slow. So if you want extreme slowness, then you'll use these slow-mo settings. Also worth a note is the cinematic mode. This is only really available in the default camera app. And this is one of those features that I see being used more and more often, but it hasn't quite arrived at looking like professional footage yet, so that's why I don't choose to use it personally. But if you do use it, one thing that's really helpful is you can go back in and edit your footage afterwards. Make sure that the focus point is exactly where you wanted, so the right thing is in and out of focus. And then I tend to turn the depth down to like f8, so that it's not as strong of an effect. When it's all the way down to like f2.0, you can see outlines start to break and the image doesn't quite look as good. So if you just make it more subtle, I find it a lot more useful. For editing, I usually use CapCut. I've found it to just gotten better and better over the years, and you can do some pretty professional things in CapCut on the phone. But most of my editing is done over in Final Cut Pro. I've done a lot of tutorials about that, especially if you need to deal with log footage, make it look cinematic. You can watch one of my videos about how to color grade it. A nice thing is when you import log footage into Final Cut, it automatically converts it into having full contrast. So you can go deeper if you want to, but you don't have to understand it to get a normal looking image. When I want to add just like a quick filter, I usually use VSCO for that. In the past, I've covered how I use this and what my favorite filters are, but this is for things like Instagram stories. So those are the most important software settings you need. Let's talk a little bit about hardware. A lot of the reason that I like to shoot with the iPhone is that it's easy and you just pull it out of your pocket and you start shooting. So I'm often not using accessories, but I make sure that a few of these are always in my bag. First of all, you need to secure your phone to tripods for all sorts of different reasons. And the best way to do that is the Stalman clamp. This is a vertical clamp built for filmmakers at a professional level. So I worked with Condor Blue to design this. It has every feature I could have possibly hoped for in it. It's incredibly well made. And like I say, it is for professionals. So like it is a premium clamp. One thing I really love about it is because it's so solid with that Arca Swiss connection on the bottom. Once it's clamped down and I'm pressing on the iPhone screen, it doesn't jiggle. And this is very important that your phone's not moving, especially if you're doing any sorts of visual effects or a time lapse. You can't have your phone moving during the shot. Now, again, this is a more like premium clamp. So if you're looking for a more affordable option, I don't know, there's a billion cheap ones over on Amazon. I can't really recommend them because none of them were very good. That's why I designed my own. So anyway, if you want to see, the link is in the description below. And the other essential accessory is a microphone. Not for every situation, but you just should have one ready to go because sometimes you need it. I did a whole video breaking down different mics for social media content specifically. So here's a comparison of different sound qualities. This is what the internal mic sounds like on the phone. This is what the tiny Amazon mic sounds like. This is what the mic sounds like on earbuds. This is what a wired lav mic sounds like when I'm holding it in my hand. This is what a wired lav mic sounds like when it's clipped to my t-shirt. This is what the wireless mic sounds like when I'm holding it in my hand. This is what the shotgun microphone sounds like. This is what the wireless mic sounds like when it's clipped to my shirt. So after testing everything, I think a wireless mic is the most essential to keep in your bag at all times. The most affordable and powerful version is the Wireless Me from Rode. It works absolutely great. But if you want something a little more professional, my favorite has been the Rode Wireless Pro, competing closely with the DJI Mic 2. I actually haven't been able to pick a favorite between the two because they both brought a lot of amazing features like 32-bit float, noise removal. Wireless microphones have gotten so much better in the last few years. For anyone that's really into iPhone accessories, there's a few things you might notice are missing. For example, I don't use an ND filter most of the time. I just find that when I'm shooting phone footage, I'm okay with it looking like it was shot on a phone to some extent. Of course, you could, and I have rigged it up bigger, so you can also add external lenses like what Moment manufactures. They're amazing, they're very well done. I just don't think they're an essential piece of the kit, even though they're really fun to play with. So that's why I left them out of this video. Like if you're considering whether you need them or not, you probably don't need them. They are a fun bonus. The essentials for most people are a clamp and a microphone. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions left about shooting video on your iPhone, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.